Hello, everybody. I'm Andrew Recinos, President and CEO. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a white person with salt and pepper hair and glasses, black jacket, and a white shirt. And I am just so glad to be here together with all of you. Today, I'm going to talk about grit and hope and acceptance and momentum. But first, I want to talk about darkness. The arts and culture sector, especially right now, especially in this country, can feel like it's been plunged into darkness. Our noble work of connecting people with art, science, history, and human expression is being defunded, sidelined, canceled. And with each new headline, things can feel darker still, and if you are personally feeling the weight of this, I get it. And if you're sometimes feeling alone in the darkness, I get that too. In fact, I've been feeling it so much lately that I've gone on my own personal quest to learn how to cut through the darkness when times are tough. And so I've done some research, I've read some books, because that's the thing I do. And then I talked to leaders from our community who I've noticed over the years seem to exude light and forge ahead no matter how tough things get. And I found that they share 4 traits, 4 powers for cutting through the darkness. The power to accept their situation no matter how dire. The power to spark momentum. The power to persevere with grit. And the power to lead with hope. And I've learned that these are powers that each of us can develop. These are powers these leaders have developed. And so today I share their stories that inspired me in hopes that they will inspire you. The first power is the power of acceptance. In his book, Good to Great, Jim Collins says, "Never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your situation." June 1st, 2024, was Anthony Roth Costanzo's first day as the general director and president of Opera Philadelphia. It was his first time leading an opera company, and the facts confronting him were this. They had $4 million in operating debt, and just a few months before opening, they'd only sold 35% of their tickets. Brutal facts. Now, Opera Philadelphia is a wonderful and storied organization, striving to bring opera to their whole community. But like so many cultural organizations, first the pandemic and then changing audience behaviors and then rising costs had clobbered their business. Anthony accepted these brutal facts and he observed an even darker one. This ceaseless slog for survival had flatlined the opera's energy. As he said to me, he needed to figure out a way to jolt the opera's energy back to life. He needed to spark momentum. And so, he took stock. On the downside, debt, ticket sales, momentum. On the upside, a beloved institution, a rock-solid team, and one more asset, Anthony himself. You see, he's maybe a rookie as a general director, but he is not a rookie to opera. Anthony Roth Costanzo is one of the world's most acclaimed countertenors in the prime of his career. And in addition to his artistry, he's got another killer talent. The man can market. Just follow him on Instagram to see his unbelievable passion for bringing opera to the widest possible audience. So, with a virtuoso storyteller as your leader, a team that is ready to try something new, and that kind of devil-may-care attitude that comes from a really desperate situation, the ingredients were in place to spark momentum. And early in his tenure, Anthony gathered the team and said, "How about this? Let's offer every single seat in the house for the entire season for $11. There are so many reasons not to do that. Not least because it will sink your earned revenue. But like many opera companies, ticket sales are actually just a fraction of their revenue. The big number is fundraising. And by dramatically dropping ticket prices, Anthony was gambling that sold-out houses and radical accessibility would excite the donors enough that they would come in and close the gap. Look, Anthony and the team knew that their energy had flatlined. They needed to do something different to spark momentum. They needed a win. And so on August 27th of last year, Opera Philadelphia announced their Pick Your Price program, offering every single seat in the house for their entire season, starting at just $11. And then they held their breath because this was an outrageous idea. They didn't know if it was going to work. Well, let's have a look at the data, shall we? Here's all of the ticket sales leading up to that big on sale, and then here's what happened when the $11 tickets went on sale. And then here we have 21 days later when they sold out their entire season. Momentum. Their socials blew up. Momentum. The press couldn't get enough. 320 news articles reaching 1.5 billion people worldwide. Momentum. Their fundraising shot up. $4 million in debt erased. But where the momentum manifested the most was in those sold-out audiences. Chock full of people that didn't look like a stereotypical opera audience. But boy, they looked a hell of a lot like Philly. "69% Gen Z and millennial. 51% household incomes under $90,000, 28% BIPOC, 68% there for the very first time. And what does it feel like to be, oh, sure, go for it. So what does it feel like to be at an Opera Philadelphia performance today? Well, check it out.
A special welcome to all of you who've never been before, and if it is your first time, will you do me a favor? Will you make some noise? Now those are some voices I love to hear.
They don't applaud, they erupt, right? As Michael Knight, who's the director of guest services, and he's here today, he told me recently that in his 20 years of working at the opera, he has never felt this kind of energy in those audiences. And not for nothing, the artists up on stage, they say the same thing. It is absolutely electric all around that place. Opera Philadelphia had found themselves deep in the darkness. They accepted brutal facts, they tried something radical, and they sparked momentum that jolted them out of the dark. The Pick Your Price program is back this season, along with the new Opera Pass membership, $11 a month membership, both tickets and memberships flying off the shelves again. Now, the moral of this story is not sell all your tickets for $11. No, nope. Anthony himself was really adamant with me about this. He said, look, this was a very specific strategy for a very specific set of situations in Philly. Now, the moral is this. If darkness has flatlined your energy, first accept it with some grace, and then think about how you can spark momentum. Do something different or unexpected or outrageous. Do something new, and then do it again and again and again with perseverance and with passion. Now, when you combine perseverance and passion, the result is grit. And in Angela Duckworth's book, Grit, and she is an academic and a psychologist, she has shared decades of research that shows that grit, far more than natural talent, is the greatest predictor for long-term human achievement. So, for a wonderful example of grit from the Tessitura community, we're going to go now to the unlikely story of the Aurora Theater in Georgia. So this story begins with two crazy theater kids filled with passion and perseverance, Ann Carol Pence and Anthony Rodriguez. So the Aurora Theater was founded in 1996 in a converted hardware store in Duluth, Georgia. And over the course of 10 years of elbow grease and long nights, Ann Carol and Anthony slowly built a following and then a business and then a downtown anchor that helped put Duluth on the map. As Anthony said to me, we did it one moment, one person at a time. One moment, one person at a time. Passion, perseverance, grit. By 2006, they'd been so successful at putting Duluth on the map that rising property values were pricing them out of the city. Ironic and brutal facts. And around that time, they spoke with a subscriber who was also a Gwinnett County commissioner, who suggested they might find greener pastures down the road in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Ann Carroll and Anthony shuddered, like they knew Lawrenceville. It was, as they said to me, a ghost town. Boarded up businesses, a pawn shop, tumbleweeds. But there's one thing that Lawrenceville had which Duluth did not. Lawrenceville wanted the Aurora Theater. They wanted them enough to make them a deal, and together with local developer Emery Morsberger, they offered to give the Aurora Theater the long-abandoned Methodist church in downtown and to help transform it into their new home. So this was their choice. They really wanted to stay in thriving Duluth, but they couldn't make the money work. Lawrenceville offered them a lifeline in a lifeless community. They had board members who hated this idea, but Ann Carroll and Anthony, these kids, had grit. And they had faith that they could start anew, one moment, one person at a time. And so they bid farewell to thriving Duluth, and they set up shop in a ghost town. Now, I would love nothing more than to tell you that that construction project was a joy, but it was not. Spiking material prices, cost overruns, delays. About halfway through construction, a faction of city government actually started a campaign to shut the whole thing down. And speaking of this time, Ann Carroll says, I steeled myself to how afraid I was. I said a lot of prayers. She accepted her current reality and then responded with grit. We knew if we could just get the space open that everything would change, and it did. And when the new Aurora Theater opened in May of 2007, it was with great fanfare, muted only by the fact that most of downtown was still a ghost town. But as before, Ann Carroll and Anthony sparked momentum and got more audiences and built excitement and built foot traffic. And before long, downtown Lawrenceville started to sprout restaurants and bars and nightlife and day life, and home values rose, and developers started to move in. And 10 years later, in 2016, the Aurora Theater was awarded the Georgia Governor's Award for Arts and Humanities, and that same year, they welcomed 80,000 people to a now thriving downtown Lawrenceville. Now, I could stop the story right there, but the thing that I have learned about people who develop acceptance and momentum and grit is that once they get started, it is damn near impossible to stop them. And so the same year that they won the Georgia Governor's Award, Ann Carroll and Anthony started talks with the city to do something even bigger. And 5 years later, in 2021, the Aurora Theater and the city jointly opened the 60,000 square foot Lawrenceville Arts Center, a campus of 5 performing spaces that hosts 800 events and 100,000 people a year. Next year marks 20 years since the Aurora Theater arrived in Lawrenceville. And today, this former ghost town is rated the second most livable city in Georgia. Now, the lesson that I take from this story can be encapsulated in a Japanese proverb. Fall 7, rise 8. Anthony and Ann Carroll, they were knocked down so many times, and every time they got back up. And when you fall, and you will, and darkness tries to hold you down, find your inner grit, your passion, and your perseverance, and you will rise again and again and again. The final power is the power of hope. You know, people will tell you that hope isn't a strategy. This next story is about an organization where hope was the strategy when nothing else remained. Now, I take the contours of this talk with permission from an amazing innovator talk that Donna Speed gave in London this past April. So in 2015, the Science Center in the English town of Bristol was having an identity crisis. They had opened 15 years before with the sort of at the time trendy name of At Bristol. And over the years, they found themselves increasingly out of step with their community and the world. And so leadership, along with commercial director Donna Speed, launched a program to rethink and rebrand. And to get back in step with their community, they consulted them deeply, ultimately getting feedback from 1,000 Bristolians. And it was with this feedback that in 2017, they relaunched as We the Curious, with a new name, a new mission, values manifesto, and a bold new vision. Imagine a world where everyone is included, curious, and inspired by science to build a better world together. Now, this was more than just words on the page. For this team, it was a North Star. Little did they know how important it would become. Now, in his book, Hope for Cynics, Stanford professor Jamil Zaki shares his research into the science of hope. He starts by busting this myth that hopeful people are somehow weaker or more naive than cynical ones. In fact, his research finds the opposite to be true. For instance, in one study of Fortune 100 leaders, they found that the more hopeful ones had consistently better results and were more innovative. He recently wrote an HBR article where he lines out 3 steps for developing a more hopeful culture. And step 1 is to set goals grounded in shared values. Well, with their new values and mission, We the Curious had achieved step 1, and with their shiny new vision, the team fanned out to every neighborhood in Bristol with this custom-built Curious Cube. And they asked everybody, what makes you curious? They ultimately gathered 10,000 questions that they planned to use as the nexus of the most ambitious exhibit of their history. It would be called simply, What If? Now, in 2019, Donna Speed was named the new CEO. And one of her first acts would be to open the What If exhibit. Installation was scheduled for April of 2020. Yeah. All right, so the second step in creating a more hopeful culture is to find ways to empower your people. So how did Donna Speed empower her team when the pandemic had shut down the world? Well, she did it with tremendous grit. She refused to cancel this exhibit, and within COVID protocols, she figured out a way to keep the installation going. And seeing this momentum on a project they had all worked on gave the staff hope. In fact, they were so empowered that when financial realities foretold massive layoffs, every single member of that team volunteered to reduce their working days to save as many jobs as possible. And it was only through this shared sacrifice that a year later, the What If exhibit did open a year late in April 2021, still under COVID protocols. Week by week, they slowly built a visitorship and community excitement. And then after a whole year of grit and COVID restrictions lifted, they entered April of 2022 with hope for the future. And then this happened. Thankfully, no one was hurt. But with the fire and then the torrents of water to put it out, We the Curious would be closed indefinitely. Hope is not a lottery ticket that you sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. Hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. Rebecca Solnit. They had no home. They had no exhibits. They had no visitors. All they had was their hopeful vision. Imagine a world where everyone is included, curious, and inspired by science to build a better world together. They took a beat to accept a whole host of brutal facts. And then they got to work wielding hope like an axe. As Donna says, the team got some electric vans and they took out activities out to every postal code in Bristol. Venues, schools, places of worship, libraries, festivals, anyone who would take them. And while Donna and her leadership team raised money to try to reopen, that team inhabited the community day after day for years. They would ultimately bring free activities to more than 40,000 children, adults, and young people. Step number 3 in building a more hopeful culture is to celebrate successes. In July of last year, 2 years, 2 months, and 22 days after that fire, Donna and her team stood in the lobby, held back tears, and cheered as the first group of visitors, school children, triumphantly marched back into a beautifully restored We the Curious. Fall 7, rise 8. Now, ultimately, the We the Curious story is a story of accepting brutal facts, sparking momentum, persevering with grit, and never, ever giving up hope. But if Donna were here with me right now, she would remind me of the superpower that makes all of those possible, the power called togetherness. Consider their story in the context of community. When they were having that identity crisis, it was the community that led them to become We the Curious. Their flagship exhibit, What If, wouldn't exist without those 10,000 questions. And in the days immediately following that fire, the Bristol people showed up once again. In Donna's own words, we were inundated with offers for help, literally hundreds of people around the city. We were supported in so many ways: meeting space, office space, donations of pocket money. Here's the lesson: acceptance, momentum, grit, hope, yes. But most of all, to cut through the darkness, unleash the superpower of togetherness. Anthony and Carol, they would agree, their story from ghost town to 100,000 visitors is the story of togetherness, one moment, one person at a time. Anthony and Opera Philadelphia, they revel in the fact that Philly has shown up for their local opera company. And for the arts and culture sector on the whole, creating togetherness is the greatest power we have. Gathering people to laugh, to cry, to learn, to celebrate together is what you do every single day. And because togetherness is the antidote to the darkness, this work has never been more important. And this power is equally important personally. Confronting brutal facts alone is terrifying. Confronting them together can be empowering. Momentum, grit, hope, all possible as solitary acts, but these powers become exponential as collective ones. If there is one lesson you can take from these stories, let it be this: don't go it alone. And while I can't make the darkness go away, I can promise you this: you are not alone. Not here, not in this community. Tessitura's greatest strength is and will always be the power of togetherness of our community through our conferences and our meetups and our online forums. This community has forged countless friendships. Take it from me, if all else fails, you'll get by with a little help from your friends. Together, we will confront brutal facts. So we must spark momentum and persevere with grit and forge ahead with hope. And together, always together, we must cut through the darkness and into the light. Thank you.